All right, welcome back, fellow scientists. Welcome back from spring break. We just found out that this is how we're going to do school for the rest of the school year, which is very disheartening for me personally, and I know that it's even more so for you guys. Um, so yeah, we're just gonna put our best foot forward, and we're gonna kind of soldier on, and we're gonna do this. So we're gonna figure it out. Um, so having said that, let's just jump right into content. We're talking about the lymphatic system today. We're moving into chapter 12, so we're done with blood. I believe that was chapter 10. So I did put blank notes on OneNote. As you can see, it's under content library, lymph system, and then I also put it in your notebook under class notes, at least when it refreshes. There it is. Then it'll be there. So if you wanna take notes that way, feel free. So I'm going to use Smart Notebook software. The last comment that I saw, thank you, Shaylin, was red. Um, so we'll use that. Go to full screen. All right, sweet. So lymph system, what is it? Basically, it's a whole body filtering system. Whole body filtering system. So liver just basically filters the blood. Lymph, we'll see, kind of filters the blood as well, but it's not just located in one organ, in one section of the body. So lymph system is a whole body filtering system. How does this work? Well, it turns out you guys remember capillaries, right? From the circulatory system. Here's our artery, our high pressure artery, and then it goes through the capillary beds, which are just the diameter of one red blood cell can barely kind of squeeze through there, and oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients and waste are exchanged, and then it goes out. The blood goes out through the vein. Well, we didn't talk about this because we weren't here yet, but these capillaries, these are actually a little bit leaky, right? And so not all of the fluid that goes in through the artery comes out through the vein. Some of it actually leaks out at these capillary beds. And so the lymph system is kind of interlaced. You can see that kind of interlaced all throughout those capillary beds, and that picks up the excess fluid that is leaked out by these capillaries. So that, of course, needs to like get be gotten rid of and be transported back to the circulatory system, because there's as much as 3 liters per day that can be lost from these capillaries. So the way that the lymph system does that, we can kind of zoom in right here on maybe the end of one of these lymph tubes right here. These lymph vessels have special little valves, right? So we can see kind of this little purple stuff, like these things are anchored to the soft connective tissue around there. And then if there's higher pressure, if there's more fluid outside, then the fluid, the lymph fluid, what used to be blood, right, goes into this little lymph vessel. But then if there's more pressure inside, right, and the fluid wants to escape, then these little valves, it's kind of like a trap door, it just kind of snaps shut, and so fluid can't escape from the lymph vessel. And so it's kind of, once it gets in there, which is really easy to do, then it's kind of stuck in there. And so then we can go up here to this diagram. So here's our capillary bed, and we talked about our lymph vessels. And so the main idea is that this whole entire system, it has valves, it has nodes, which we'll talk about here in a second. A whole thing transports it back to the veins, specifically the subclavian veins. And so we'll look at that here in a little bit. But then it gets dumped back into the circulatory system, and all is well with the world, right? So one thing that you may be asking yourself is, how in the world does lymph move through these vessels? Well, there's 2 ways really. You remember how blood moved through veins, how we had our skeletal muscles kind of squishing in, and how veins have valves. Well, the lymph system has valves as well. You can see that kind of right here. They're arranged very similarly, right? And so the skeletal muscles, they'll actually contract the lymph vessels, and that'll help to push lymph through the whole entire system. So that's one way. And then a second way is that the lymphatic vessels are actually made of smooth muscle, just like your digestive system. And so they'll actually very slowly, through the process of peristalsis, kind of move lymph through the vessels. And I don't think we've talked about peristalsis yet, but basically it's the contracting and relaxing of different sections of smooth muscle, right? So if you're trying to move this piece of food or this piece of lymph through, then the stuff behind it, right, the smooth muscle behind it is going to contract, right, and the smooth muscle in front of it is going to relax, and then that's going to move it down, and then the stuff that used to be relaxed now it's behind the bolus. This is what it's called, and so that contracts, and then this other stuff relaxes. So anyway, so that's peristalsis. If we were in class, we would do an upside down drinker lab, where you take a drink of water, hold it in your mouth, you do like a handstand, right? Like you flip yourself upside down, and then you can actually your esophagus made of smooth muscle, through the process of peristalsis will actually bring the water from your mouth up to your stomach, right? Because you're upside down. And it's actually pretty cool. We have stethoscopes, we listen, we can hear when the water enters the stomach. But we don't get to do that, which is yeah. I'm kind of acting, and I'm kind of actually really sad as well. All right, so let me just check my notes. Da, 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 da. Yep, good. All right. So moving on, we're going to get through this as fast as possible because I know that your time is valuable. So lymph nodes, where are lymph nodes in the body? So you can see they're kind of separated into different categories. So we have our cervical nodes, right? So that's face and neck, right? So if you've ever had like your like right here, like your thymus, right, or like kind of around here, swollen, like you have a bacterial or a viral infection or something like that. So those are your lymph nodes that are swollen, right? Axillary nodes, usually when they're checking for cancer, they'll do a biopsy of an axillary node because it's really close to the surface and it's kind of easily hidden. So it's a very convenient spot to take a biopsy, to take a sample to see what's going on in the lymph system, right? And then we have our inguinal nodes, which are just kind of all in the inguinal region, inguinal pelvic area down there. And then I wish this diagram went a little bit further, but they're also kind of congregated in the knees. You can see they're kind of congregated in the elbows as well, right? So for some reason, lymph vessels kind of are congregated around joints. So that's one thing to note. Second thing to note is that you can kind of see it's really kind of vague, right? But you can kind of see that this area of this person's body is kind of in green, right? And then all the rest is kind of flesh colored or kind of pink or whatnot. So what that signifies is that we have our right lymphatic duct, and this is something that I would like you to memorize. Right lymphatic duct drains the right arm and the right side of the face, and then the right side of the thorax, right, or the thoracic cavity, and then that drains into the right subclavian vein, which we talked about in the circulatory system, cardiovascular, respiratory system, and then here we have what's known as the thoracic duct, right? And then that drains all the rest of the lymphatic system, and then that empties into the left subclavian vein. So from this diagram, which by the way, we're gonna go forward. We're gonna have quizzes. I'm not exactly sure what that's gonna look like yet. I'll tell you. I'll have more information for you on Thursday. But we will have a quiz over this diagram and other diagrams, but over this diagram on Thursday. So everything that I've underlined, you should be able to identify on a diagram. So let's see, lymph nodes, filtered, clustered, back to circulatory system. Yep. All right, sweet. So now let's go in and let's kind of focus specifically on lymph nodes. Lymph node. So as we've talked about, these are clustered all throughout the body. You'll notice that we have, in this diagram at least, we have four lymph vessels going in, and we only have two lymph vessels coming out. So lymph fluid moves through the lymphatic system and the lymph nodes very slowly. Slow. slow. And what that does, that gives all of these white blood cells that are clustered in the lymph node, that gives them time to basically like analyze the blood or the lymph fluid and kind of fight infection and make sure that everything's working. So lymph nodes, what do we have to know about those? So these house white blood cell macrophages. So these house white blood cell WBC macrophages. And we'll talk more about what macrophages actually do on Thursday, right? We won't get into that, but just kind of know, just kind of have that in your mind. Macrophages live not only in the lymph nodes, but elsewhere also. But we'll get into that later. And then white blood cell. So lymph nodes also house white blood cell lymphocytes, which is coincidentally how they got their name. So these would be the famous B cells and T cells of the immune system. So, like I said, we'll talk more about specifically what they do on Thursday. So that's the things that I want you to know for lymph nodes, just that they house macrophages, lymphocytes, B cells, T cells, and that it moves slowly. Um, Interesting to note, right? Little diagnostic tool here. If a person has swollen and painful lymph nodes, then usually it's a virus or a bacterial infection. If they have swollen lymph nodes but they're not painful, then sometimes that can be an indication of cancer. That's just one indication of cancer, one diagnostic tool that doctors use. So kind of interesting to know. All right, last slide. Hang in there. There are other organs in the lymphatic system that are not actually connected to the series of ducts and then feed back into the circulatory system. So we're going to go ahead and label this other lymphatic tissue. And of course, this will be on our quiz on Thursday, both the names and the functions. So of course, you guys probably guessed it. Right here, we have our tonsils. And tonsils are basically lymph nodes that aren't connected to the whole entire system. They're just individual standalone kind of glands that have a lot of lymphocyte cells in them. And they're conveniently clustered around the mouth, which is a common place where bacteria and viruses and foreign objects, foreign invaders tend to enter the body. So they're kind of there. They're kind of the sentries, the sentinels, the guards that kind of take care of those things. So tonsils, these are kind of standalone lymph nodes. And that's why if you've had your tonsils out, right, because they become inflamed, well, they're actually doing their job, but sometimes they kind of become overwhelmed, and so all the bad stuff is kind of congregated or concentrated right there, and so they just take those out, and then you're fine. You don't have any guards anymore, but that's okay. You have other guards to do the job. So we should say other lymphatic tissue. These are all characterized by an abundance of lymphocytes. I'm sorry, I forgot that. We should go back. So all of these types of tissues have lots of lymphocytes. And remember, lymphocytes are our white blood cells, our T cells, and our B cells, and we'll talk about what those do on Thursday. So then this thing right here, this is actually kind of a dual function organ. We'll learn about this in chapter 9 when we talk about the endocrine system, but this is the thymus gland. And so the thymus gland, it does a lot of things. It produces hormones and different things like that. But what we're going to focus on is that it basically programs or it teaches young lymphocytes how to behave or what to do. So it teaches those B cells and it teaches those T cells how to act. So thymus, this is where young lymphocytes mature, kind of like high school. Young lymphocytes mature. All right, then moving down here, this is the spleen. So the spleen, it has lymphocyte activity, obviously, because it's listed in this diagram. But the main thing that I want you to remember about the spleen is it is the red blood cell graveyard. It's kind of like the liver in a lot of ways, actually. It stores blood. The liver also stores blood. So if you have a major blood loss event, like you cut off your arm and you're hemorrhaging or something like that, the spleen and the liver will actually contract and will actually put more blood into your circulatory system. Hopefully, while someone ties a tourniquet on your arm to stop the bleeding. So that's kind of cool. It also filters blood. A lot of blood runs through there. The spleen is specific in that it kind of filters out the red blood cells and it returns the iron back to the liver and back to the bone marrow, so that they can use that to make more hemoglobin. But there is lymphocyte tissue in the spleen, which is why it's listed here. But yeah, spleen, red blood cell graveyard, and then I think last one, yep, are these little yellow dots on the small intestine. So these are little things known as Peyer's patches. Peyer's Peyer's patches. Right, so Peyer's patches, basically, these are tonsils for your small intestine. Yep, tonsils for your small intestine. So just like we talked about how the mouth is a common point of entry for foreign invaders, right? You have lots of bacteria and not necessarily viruses, hopefully, but just kind of in general, you have lots and lots and lots and lots of bacteria in your small intestine because that helps you to digest food. It's part of your microbiome, and there's actually a lot of interesting research going on with your natural microbiota and your natural microbiome and health indications and stuff like that. But that's a topic for another day. So Peyer's patches, lots of bacteria in the small intestine, and these are just kind of there as guards, as sentinels to make sure that bacteria stays in the small intestine and it doesn't get out of the small intestine and get out to the rest of the body and then wreak havoc and cause harm and sepsis and all sorts of stuff like that. So this diagram, like I said, will also be on the quiz on Thursday. More information upcoming about that. So hopefully this has been informative. This has been Mr. Leo. Uh, Saddened that we don't get to come back to class, but we will survive. We will get through this. God is still in charge. So thanks for watching, and I will see you on the flip side.